Welcome to Mindy and the Mic from Stigma to Connection. I'm your host, Mindy. I am so excited to have you guys listen to this guest today. My guest today is Susan, and Susan is a trauma resiliency coach, speaker, and author of The Other Side of the Gun, My Journey from Trauma to Resiliency. Susan's journey through unimaginable loss and trauma, and the resilience she found on the other side, not only transformed her life, but now she uses her experiences to help others heal and move forward. She experiences the death of her father, and she'll talk about more how and why throughout the podcast. Susan works with individuals who've experienced trauma to guide them through the healing process, helping them regain control of their lives and the strength they never thought they could possibly get. In this episode, we'll hear about her personal journey, the lessons she's learned along the way, and the tools she now shares to help others build resilience. And before we dive in, I want to remind you that if you're enjoying the podcast and conversations that we have on here and want to support the work that we're doing, you can now be a supporter on our Patreon. By joining the community, you'll support our audio and video editors. So check out the link in the description for more details. Now, let's jump into today's episode with Susan. I'm Mindy, and I have a microphone. So this must be Mindy and the Mic from Stigma to Connection. Let's have a conversation. Welcome to Mindy and the Mic from Stigma to Connection. And today's guest, I have my friend Susan on. Susan, how are you today?
I'm good. Thanks
That's
for having
good.
me.
Yeah, where are you calling in from?
Denver, Colorado.
Denver. Do you go skiing a lot? Are you a big skier?
Not anymore. It's too expensive.
Fair. That's a very good point. Everything's so expensive these days anyways. Are you a big hiker? Do you like the mountains?
We do a little bit of hiking here and there. I don't do a ton though.
Yeah, I've been to Colorado only for hiking purposes, it feels like. And I went skiing once out there.
We have our 14ers here,
Right.
which is
Right.
big hiking.
Yeah, that's like backpacking material.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Do you live outside of the city or in the city?
Yeah, I actually live in a town that's about 30 miles south of Denver.
Oh, sweet.
I say Denver, Colorado, just because people know where Denver, Colorado is. If I say
Yeah.
Castle Rock, Colorado, they go, huh? It's south. It's like on your way to Colorado Springs.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
And then did you always grow up in Colorado?
No, I grew
No.
up in Southern California.
Wow. That's
Yeah.
a kind of major shift, I would say.
It was. It was. I grew up there. My husband grew up there, and we moved here in 97.
Wow. Okay. You both grew up in California and then you end up in Colorado.
Mm-hmm.
So just tell our viewers, what's your story? Because I personally was interested in it just as we got to talk to more too. And I think that your story is very inspirational. So if you could just start from the beginning.
Okay, well, strap yourself in.
Okay. Will do.
Okay, well, my story starts when I was 17 years old. I was living in Southern California. My dad was a Los Angeles police detective. He was a robbery homicide detective. I had a 6-year-old brother. On Halloween day or morning, my dad was actually getting ready to go to court. He was going to testify in a case that he was the lead detective on. And he and I were having a chat. I wanted to go to a party that night. And so I was begging him to go with my boyfriend and my friends, but it was a school night. So he was like, yep, that's not happening. He left. I went to school, and the whole plan was my dad would leave court, go pick up my brother from school, and come home. My mom would come home from work. And at that point, my plan was that I was going to schmooze them enough to be able to go to this party. So I was home getting ready, and my mom came in, and she was wearing her costume from her work thing. The phone rang, and I ran to it thinking that it was one of my girlfriends or, somebody. It had to have been for me anyways, who would call my parents.
Yeah.
That was my mentality. And unfortunately, when I answered the phone, it wasn't for me. It was a lady from my brother's school. All she said that was there was a drive-by shooting and my dad was involved.
Oh, no.
And at that point, I handed my mom the phone. She had come around the corner. I handed her the phone, and I just stood there kind of in shock and watching her body language. I knew it was bad. I knew it was bad when I was watching her. And so she got off the phone and said, "We're going to the school." So I said, "Okay." So we got in the car. It was about a 7-minute drive. When we got to the school, the way that the school is set up is there's a parking lot right in the middle of the school.
Yeah.
And it is now, past 5 o'clock. So all the kids are getting out on the back side of the school from after school care. We got out of the car and started heading towards the back of the school. And we could just see like the night sky was lit up because there were so many police cars.
Mhm.
And then there was also an ambulance that was just sitting there. And while we were walking, we caught from our corner of our eyes, we saw my dad's truck. So we started running towards the truck. And as close as we got to it, we saw glass on the ground and we rounded the corner and there he was, partially covered up. And at that point, I just froze. My mom dropped to her knees and screamed. She was screaming, and I was not able to process what I was seeing. And so what I did was hyper focus on that ambulance. And something in my mind kept saying, why isn't anybody helping him? Where is everyone? Why isn't anyone helping him? Because it just was not connecting what I was seeing. A little bit after that, two officers grabbed us by the arm and escorted us into the school, into an office. And I sat down, and my mom was taken aside by some detectives. I didn't know where my brother was at this point. I didn't know if he was hurt. So I sat in the chair just trying to comprehend what was going on. There was just so much chaos around me. And my young brain was just really struggling with putting two and two together. So I overheard two ladies that worked at the school, and the one lady said that my dad was deceased. And that is when my world shattered. I wanted to run out of that room and as fast as I could, as far as I could. And the problem was is that my whole body felt like it was cement. I couldn't move. Physically, I couldn't move at all. And my mom came back and she said, I'm sending you with a neighbor. So even though I wanted to run out of that room, I still needed to be with my family unit. I needed my mom and my brother, and I needed to have that support around me, but I didn't get that. I was sent to the neighbor's house, and the poor neighbor, like, she was trying to grapple with what she was dealing with. She had known my parents for years. I was friends with their daughter when we were young. And so she was just trying to navigate all of her emotions around what she knew, which wasn't a whole lot, but she knew enough that it was bad. At the time, I was dating a guy, I had been dating him for 3 months. And all I wanted was him at this point. Like, I told her, "Could you just please call my boyfriend?" And she said, "Okay." And she called him, but she didn't give him a whole lot of information. So when he showed up, he was like, "All right, grab your purse. Where's your mom? Where's your brother? What hospital is he at?" Like, and I couldn't spit out the words.
Yeah, you
If I
probably couldn't
said it,
speak.
yeah, I couldn't speak. I felt like if I said the words, then they were real. But he was very persistent, as most people would be.
Mhm.
And I finally just blurted it out. He's gone. He's not at a hospital. He's gone.
Mhm.
And I watched my boyfriend sink to his knees and start sobbing. And so both of us were like, we were kids. Most 19-year-old boys would have hightailed it out of there, though, I got to say. He stuck around. He knew I needed a friend. I would need a friend. And he stuck it out. But we were both, that was in a time in the 80s. There
Mhm.
was no talk of mental health back then. And there
No.
definitely weren't any resources for kids. We had to depend on the adults around us to kind of guide us and help us through that. And unfortunately, I didn't have that. I didn't get to see my brother. When I finally went home, there was so many people in my home. My quiet little street was filled with police cars. There were helicopters overhead. Unbeknownst to us, we too were targets, because this was a planned out assassination of my father. And it had to do with the case that he had testified in. I got home, I had all these people in my house, and all I wanted to do was hide. And I was like, I don't want to talk to anybody. I don't want to be asked any questions. Like, I just want to hide in my room. And for 6 days, they didn't find the guys for 6 days. And so for 6 days, we had police presence in our front yard, in our backyard, every day, every night. My life looked so different.
How old were you again? Sorry.
17.
17? That's what you
Yeah.
said. Yeah, that's like the moment too where your identity's being shaped, where you're just transitioning into adulthood,
Yeah.
when just everything, your world starts becoming reality of like,
Yep.
everything's not under your parents' roof. Your choices have actions and consequences.
Yeah. Yeah, and I had a very close relationship with my dad. My dad
Yeah.
was the kind of man that was very present. Like, he
Mhm.
always made you feel like you were the most important person in the room. And he was also my safety net. Like, I knew when dad was around, that I was safe, or that's how he made me feel. And
Right.
so now I had that stripped from me, and my relationship with my mom was shaky at best. So navigating that relationship without him there was very difficult, just because he was kind of the voice of reason. He just was the person, the solid person in my life, and now
Yeah.
he was gone. At that time, I didn't know all of the mental health thing that was going on with me, and I didn't know how to advocate for myself. I didn't know how to verbalize what was going on. But at the time, I went into a deep depression. I had panic attacks. I was very anxious and on edge all the time. I walked around in a fog. I didn't feel like my life was my life anymore. I felt like I was just existing and not living anymore. And anyone who has gone through loss, especially tragic loss like that, that's kind of a normal thing that happens. Your body just
Mhm.
kind of goes into sleep mode without sleeping. So I wasn't sleeping. I was just barely existing. My mom kind of turtled into herself, so there was no like check-ins or anything like that. And she came to me about a month after my dad was killed and said that LAPD wanted to pay for us to go to therapy. Well, back
That's
then I
something.
thought, if you go to a therapist, you're crazy, because that was my young mind. And I was also in the state of mind where, like, if you put me in a direction, that was the direction I went. There
Yeah.
was no pushback, there was no nothing. So when my mom voluntold me that I was going to therapy, I was like, okay, I guess I'm going to therapy. In hindsight, this therapist was not ready, or probably not educated in trauma. And I feel like he didn't want to dip his toes. I came across a situation where I didn't know how to advocate and verbalize what was going on. If I felt like if I did verbalize what was going on, they would lock me away. I must be nuts. So they're going to put me somewhere, right? And I was scared. I didn't want to do that. And then he didn't even ask me. So he didn't ask me the questions that would open that up. He never asked me how that night affected me. And I know I get that all the time, where people are like, I'm sorry, what? But that's what I mean. Like, I feel like he didn't do that because he wasn't prepared.
What did he do? Did he just give you coping skills or
He didn't
yeah.
even give me coping skills. He basically let me talk the whole time. So he talked to me about my relationship with my mother,
Okay.
my brother and I's relationship, my boyfriend and I's relationship, and school. That's it.
So he was basically avoiding the problem at hand,
Yes,
like the source of
absolutely.
the trauma.
Yeah, because I couldn't verbalize it, or was afraid to verbalize it. I went through this for an entire year, and
Yeah.
every week I'd be like, this is the week he's going to do it. He's going to help me. He's going to help me feel better, and it didn't happen. And so a year later, he looked at me and he said, Susan, you're a well-rounded young lady, and I don't need to see you again. You're going to be fine for the rest of your life. I walked out of that office and I thought, oh my God, I'm crazy. Like,
What the actual heck?
I've cracked, I'm crazy. I'm going to have to deal with these things that happen to me by myself.
That makes me want to advocate for younger you. Yeah, as a therapist, you should find a therapist that fights for you, asks you
Yes.
questions, and go to the places that you may not want to go. Like, I think he was trying to help you distract yourself almost, it sounds
Yeah.
like, by redirecting
That's
you to
pretty
other
much it. It was almost
relationships.
like I could just go there and vent. In its own little way helped me a little bit because at least I had someone to talk to, but it didn't make me walk out of there going, "Gosh, I feel so much better."
If anything, they probably left you with more questions.
Yes. So when I left his office after the year, I was just like, "Okay, well, I'm just going to have to figure out how to cope with these things myself." And what I ended up doing is I adopted the emotional mask. People would say things like, "You're so strong, Susan. You're so brave,
Mhm.
Susan." And that's what I wore. And so anytime I was just a hot mess inside, nobody on the exterior would know it because I
Right.
would wear this mask. I would be like, "I'm fine. I'm great. I'm doing." But inside there was so much turmoil. There was just so much going on.
How
There were
could there
times
not
that I was
be?
yeah, there were times that I was suicidal.
Yeah.
A couple of those times my boyfriend like brought me back from that dark place. I remember him going, "Okay, grab a pillow. We're going for a drive." And I'm like, "What?" And he's like, "Just grab a pillow and we're going to go for a drive." And we did. And he's like, "All right." He stopped and he's just like, "Scream into that pillow, like scream into it." And he had no idea what he was doing. He had no idea that that was releasing a lot for me, a lot of anger and frustration. And especially because as time went on, my mom chose drinking as a
Coping skill?
coping skill. And
Mhm.
so that increased the abuse that happened.
Yeah.
That was kind of his way of being like, "Okay, let out all of the frustration, that you're feeling, whatever." I went through living in fight or flight. I lived in fight or flight for 14 years of my life.
Again, how could you not, though?
Right. In writing my book, what I realized was that I kept myself from having real relationships with people because when you're in fight or flight, you can't recognize if someone is to your highest good. That brings something to the relationship. So there were people in my life that I would allow in my life that would use me for whatever reason, right? In high school, same thing. Like I couldn't see who was being a good friend and who was just being there. And I had good friends. The thing with them is, and writing my book helped them to understand, but they would tiptoe around me. "Ooh, let's not upset her because she's going to break into a million pieces and I don't want to be responsible for that." You know what I mean? That kind of feel.
Yep.
So they just tiptoed around things. They treated me like I was this fragile little thing all the time.
Because
And
they were afraid to engage with you. Like, it's
absolutely.
not even a malicious thing. I just think when
No.
someone goes through trauma, it's easier not to engage because one, you're saving face. Two, you
Right.
don't have to like risk of saying something bad. And
Right.
three, it's a lot easier to not deal with someone that's going through something like that.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
so I don't blame them. I mean, first of all,
Yeah.
like emotionally, we're not mature at that age, like we're
No.
not, we're not. And so most adults didn't know what to say to me. I get that part. There's no blame there whatsoever. In fact, I just had this conversation with my best friend because when she read my book, she says I cried so hard because she realized that one, she was doing that, but she didn't realize the turmoil that was going on at the same time.
Yeah, it's definitely a phenomenon that I definitely resonate and relate to you to, just for some of the traumas that I've been through. That's why I was rephrasing everything that you were saying, because I was like, I know exactly what you're talking about, and I
Yeah,
know
yeah.
exactly the consequences that it has on you
Yep,
and the effects it has on them. And then I
absolutely.
don't know if you like your best friend said that. I had people come up to me and they apologized to me years later, and they're like,
Yeah,
"Mindy, I'm so sorry that you had to go through that." And I'm over here like, "Yeah, I processed it all now." Dot
yeah,
dot dot
yeah,
dot. But I really
yeah.
do
Well,
appreciate the sympathy.
I just had this conversation with her last year. I gave her a safe space. I held that space for her that she could tell me the things that she wanted to tell me all these years, right?
Mhm.
And I told her, I love you for that. I think there was a healing in that conversation for her, and that was really important for me. It was pretty incredible. Even people that went to high school with me that knew me but didn't really know me, and they read my book and they were like, "Holy cow, wow. I had no idea." And
Yep.
I feel like I should have been a better friend to you. And I had to, like, again, give them a safe space and say, look, we were young and we didn't know. It's not every day that a police officer gets assassinated, right? That's not a normal thing that happens, right? That kind of gun violence. And I get it. I understand that you didn't know what to say or how to be there or how to be a better friend to me. And that's okay. That
I didn't
that's
know what to
okay.
do.
So yeah, I mean, it took me 14 years of living in fight or flight. I married the boyfriend. We're still together.
Good. Oh,
Almost
awesome.
40 years, which is like nuts.
Love to hear that.
We've been through a lot
Yeah.
because he too went through the trauma.
Yeah.
He may not have seen what I saw, but everything moving forward was very traumatic for him,
You were
just
probably
as much
trauma
as it was
bonded to
me.
some extent as well.
We are in the way that he understands me. He's in his journey now. We've spent so many years in me healing, and now it's his turn to kind of evolve for himself. But we moved, like I said, we moved here in 97. And at that point, we were married and had 2 kids. I was working as a hairdresser at the time, actually.
Okay.
I was working at a salon that was close to Littleton, Colorado. April 20th of 99, I was working. I went and I took a break from my client and went into the back room. I turned on our little TV and up popped the live coverage of the Columbine shooting. I sat in front of that TV and had flashbacks. I had a visceral reaction. I started to sweat. I was having a panic attack, all the things that can happen when you get triggered. And my coworker, I had never told her my story. So she was confused as to why I was having this reaction because she's like, "You're too young to have kids there. I know that you don't live in the area. So what is happening to you?" Now, remember, I was told I was going to be fine for the rest of my life. I didn't even know why I was having this reaction, right? I told myself, you know what? You got to get your crap together, right? Like, let's put that mask back on and get through the day. We'll just get through the day. I'm sure this will fade out and you'll be fine. Right. And everyone around me the rest of the day was mad, was crying, was emotional. I mean, it was a very emotional day for people. I was like, this isn't bothering me. This isn't affecting me. Finished my day. And the minute I walked through those doors, all of it came flooding back.
When you're putting on that mask, you're just suppressing it and not
Yeah.
intentionally. You're
Yeah.
stuffing it all down and you're
Yeah.
telling your body and brain, like, deal with this later, later,
Right.
later, later. And then it has to come out sometime. Yep.
It did badly.
Yeah.
It did worse than the first time. I was spiraling and I knew it. I had this mental fight because it's like, I don't want to feel like this anymore, but I'm a mom and I can't leave my babies. And so, even though I wanted to end it, I kept thinking of my baby. It's like I had to. It was
Mhm.
it was a real fight. And my husband, the smart man that he is, stopped me at the door one day and he said, "You have 2 choices. You either go get help today or I'm putting you in a hospital."
Good for him, honestly, though.
He saved my life.
Yeah.
I put up the white flag. I'm like, "Okay, I'll go get help." And I did. I went to a physician and the physician put antidepressants because that's what they do. And then he handed me a business card and he said, "I want you to make an appointment with this therapist." And I literally laughed in his face because I said, I tried this 14 years ago and it did not work. So what makes you think this is going to work now? And he looked at me and said, "You really don't have a choice." I said, okay. And I made the appointment, and it was the best thing I ever did in my life
Good.
because I knew it was different. In the first 3 minutes of sitting with her and describing everything that I was going through, she
Yeah.
asked me, where did this stem from? And then I was able to tell her my trauma. And when I was 17, she stopped me and she said, Susan, everything you've gone through since you were 17 is normal because you have PTSD. And I was like, huh? How can I have PTSD? I didn't go to war. Like, I'm not in the
Yeah, that's
military.
the stereotype with PTSD.
And
Oh,
she
you
said,
have to go
no,
to
no,
war.
no. She said, anyone who has trauma, experiences trauma, can have PTSD. But what you need to understand is PTSD doesn't just go away. You learn
Nope.
to manage it.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
in that moment, Mindy, I had hope. I was like, oh my God, you mean I'm not crazy? You mean I'm
Yeah.
not broken? You mean I can heal from this? I always say, like, the sky opened up and rainbows shot out because I finally had answers as to why I was going through all this turmoil and all of these things were happening to me. I had
Yeah.
no idea. And I felt so grateful that day. I felt so much hope. I had my person. I finally had my person that was going to allow me and guide me in my healing. And that was the beginning of my healing journey.
Yeah, that's awesome. Wow. It seems like that just the amount of you went through a long journey. That's what I'm trying to
Yeah,
say.
I
You went
did.
through a long journey of trauma and also not even recognizing that you had PTSD. And you had some unhelpful characters, like your past therapist, not the one that helped you, but the first one.
Yeah,
And I think he probably made you regress some of your progress because acted like there was nothing wrong.
right.
And so then when he didn't like point out like, "Hey, we should actually get to the root of things," that actually made it worse because you kept stuffing it all like, how could you not though? Like, you didn't
I
know
had
any
no
better.
tools.
Yeah,
I
you
had
didn't
no
know what you
tools. I
didn't
had no
know.
idea how to stop, I didn't know how to regulate my nervous system. I didn't know how to ground myself. I didn't know any of that. And my new therapist is the one, and she was funny because she's like 14 years. Okie dokie. She said, we're going to have to attack this a little at a time. I don't want to overwhelm you either. So we're going to attack each mental thing that happens to you. So, like each emotional thing that happens to you. So, at the time in our very first session, she said to me, what is the one thing right now that is your biggest obstacle? What is the one thing that's really causing you a lot of harm? And
Yeah.
I said, I'm not sleeping. And if you don't sleep, your depression gets exacerbated
Yep.
and your anxiety, because your
Heightens.
nervous system is all out of whack. And so she said, okay, we're going to address that. Let's get you sleeping without any drugs. And I was like, okay, I'm good with that. And she said, have you ever journaled before? And I was like, huh?
What is that?
And she said, well, you can do it in different ways. She said, some people write in a journal, some people play music or write songs or do art. Now there's podcasts. But she said, you can do this however you feel comfortable. I thought she was a little nuts, I got to tell you. I was a little
Yeah.
skeptical. I said, okay, well, tell me a little bit more about it. And she said, well, what do you like to do? And I said, I write. And she said, great. So here's what you're going to do. You're going to put a pad of paper and a pen on your nightstand by your bed. And before you go to bed, I want you to take, she gave me a couple of prompts. And she said, I want you to take everything that's in your head out and put it on the paper. And she's like, I don't care the way you spell it. I don't care about punctuation. Like, I don't care if it even makes sense. Just put it on the paper. And I literally was like, are you sure about this? Like, I don't know about this. This sounds a little hokey. And she goes, just try it. Just just try it. And I said, all right, I'll do it. So the first night I tried it, I got like a couple hours sleep. And I was like, huh, okay. And by the second night, I got a couple more hours of sleep. And I was like, hmm. And by the third night, I was sleeping like a baby. And I didn't want
Good.
to admit it. It's like, how did this work? How did this happen? I don't get it. This is like so simple. How could it be just so simple and be so powerful? I don't get it. And
Yeah.
so when I went back to her the next week, I was like, she goes, how did it go? And I said, I've been sleeping for the last 4 days. She said,
Good.
great. And I said, and it's helped my brain fog and, that kind of thing. And so she's like, fantastic. Keep doing it. So that was my very first modality was journaling. And I
Mhm.
just thought, how can that be so powerful? But it is. And I teach people that now, that journaling is such a powerful tool and anyone can do it, and
Yeah.
it's free,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so the next thing we tackled was my anxiety and learning to regulate my nervous system. So she started, and she was a little ahead of her time. She, I guess, had done like some dissertation on box breathing. And so she did. She taught me how to box breathe to regulate my nervous system. And
Was she a
so
psychologist?
she was a psychologist,
Okay.
psychiatrist.
Psychiatrist? Okay. If
Yeah.
you said dissertation, and I might completely went to PhD probably.
Yeah. So I think she
Yeah.
was PhD. Yeah, pretty sure.
Mhm. Mhm.
She's very ahead of her time. Like she really did a lot of research because her specialty was severe trauma. Thank God for me, right? I finally got the right doctor.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and she really was diving into PTSD. So that was even better. My goal is to get my message out to as many people as I can because, especially now, I think between therapists and coaches, we're going to be very busy people. There's a lot of people walking this earth right now that are in trauma. They've been in trauma, but they don't realize that whatever they went through, especially as a young kid, was traumatic because maybe it was an environmental thing. I've met people like that. I've had to be the first person to hear their story, and for me to say, you went through trauma. That's trauma, right? Especially when it comes to sexual abuse,
Yeah,
children.
people are afraid of that word too. It's interesting. They have a visceral reaction to it of
They
like, "Oh, I
do.
don't have trauma. I don't have trauma. I'm fine. I'm fine." But then we're just barely scratching the surface.
Yeah.
I've seen this with some clients. I've seen this with some friends. Like when you
Yeah.
just talk, like barely scratching the surface, and then you can
Oh,
see
yeah.
there's a lot underneath the iceberg,
Well,
and you're
and then
like,
yeah, and then you recognize that because whatever it is, whether it's been the trauma or programming
mm-hmm,
has a lot to do with it and our mindset. And I call them shadows. And so when you have your own shadows inside when you recognize it in someone else, it causes a reaction. You have a visceral reaction to it. And a lot
right,
of people are like, I don't know why I act the way I do, or this triggers me in some way or whatever. And a lot of that is either, like I said, like programming or trauma, or I've had both. Growing up with a narcissistic parent, my mother, was not easy. And I'm now working through that part of my healing journey. And we're no contact. I wrote
mm-hmm,
the book,
mm-hmm,
and she decided that that was the end of our relationship. I had to tell my story and be authentic and let it all out. And in doing that, I had to tell her story, and she didn't like it. And that's okay. Like, I'm
yeah,
at peace for the first time in many
good,
years. And at first that was hard because like people were like, but she's your mother, but she's getting older, but she's, and I'm like, yeah, I understand that. But the choices that she made had consequences. The choices that she continues to make, they have
Yeah.
consequences. And I have just learned to love myself enough to be able to walk away and do what's best for my mental health and my family's mental health, and that is all stemmed about, stackable trauma. Like you have one main trauma and then you have little traumas along the way. And I think people just don't, that's not a conversation either. People think of trauma as one huge event, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's not. It can be little things along the way of your life that just stack on top of each other.
For
Yeah.
sure. For
And
sure.
like you said, if you don't diagnose it, if you don't start to heal it, it can take a better part of your life away from
Yep.
you.
It'll just come out somewhere.
It will. And,
Mhm.
whether it's, in relationships with people or, relationship with your own self. And so, I always say, a lot of people look to external things to save them. And what they need
Mhm.
to understand is they have it. We all have it inside to be able to heal ourselves. We
Mhm.
need to do the
Mhm.
work to do it though. And in doing that work, you have to be a little brave. You have to be able to step off that cliff. And when you do, I always describe this as when you are able to get on the other side of your pain and it no longer has a hold over your life, that is priceless.
Right. Yep.
And that's what I want for others. I want to give to others what I got in 99.
Yeah.
I want people to know, one, that they're not alone, and two, that there is hope. That no matter
Mhm.
what you've gone through in your life, one, you have the strength within, the light within to be able to move through that and heal through that. I don't have any secret sauce. I don't
Mhm.
I don't have any fairy dust or anything like that. Like we all have it within. You just have to find it. I had to figure out my purpose. And
Right.
I found that out while I was writing my book.
Yeah.
I didn't write it until I was 50 years old. I knew when I wrote it, it was because I was solid mentally. I had my tools in my back pocket that if whatever
Mhm.
emotion came up for me, I was going to be able to pull myself out of it and not spiral. But there were times where fear would start to come up, and there were three different major things for me. One, my mom and I were hanging on by a string. And I thought, this book will either end it
Mhm.
or it'll open a conversation because my mom never knew that I was suicidal.
Yeah.
My
Yeah.
mom never saw or heard or checked in and asked about anxiety, about my depression, by anything. Like there was no check because her priority was her
Mhm.
and my brother since he was so much younger. But the abuse was there with him as well. And then the second one was with my husband because we've
Mhm.
been through a lot. I spoke about a situation with us and was very honest about it. And he takes responsibility for his end. But
Mhm.
at the same time, it's just like, oh gosh, am I gonna shake some trees? Am I gonna what's gonna happen with that? And so I I was a little worried about that. I was a little fearful of that. And the third one was two of the men that were involved in my dad's murder was still in prison. And me putting myself out there in the public eye like this, there was that fear that there would be some retaliation. My main reason, besides healing, being cathartic for myself, my main reason that I wrote the book was because I knew that by me telling my story and putting out my message, that maybe some other people can find healing in it.
Mhm.
And whether it be my family members, whether it be law enforcement, because there was so much anger and sadness around my dad's death, even all these years. Like the
Yeah,
anger was palpable when you started to tell the story. I knew that, maybe with them seeing the resiliency side of me, seeing how I'm healing through this would help them heal. Like,
that's amazing. Wow.
um, and so anytime that fear came up, I just focused on my purpose. I saw the faceless people out there that needed to hear this, that needed to hear hope, that needed to hear that they weren't alone, to hear that these were the emotions I was going through, because it's probably similar to what they were going through, and seeing that you can go through all of that and heal.
Yeah, that's
So
awesome.
that became my purpose. And that's where the trauma resiliency coaching, I was very clear about what type of coaching I wanted to do, where I could be most powerful in utilizing my own experiences and helping others heal. Mhm.
That's amazing. As we wrap up here, where can people find you, Susan?
Well, I do have a website.
Okay,
It's susansnowspeaks.com. And it's a great resource for people. There is information on my speaking, there's information on my coaching, and there's also information on my book. My
perfect.
book
And then
is The Other Side of the Gun: My Journey from Trauma to Resiliency, and it is on Amazon. It's on Amazon, and it's in Kindle form as well. And I am getting ready to go into a studio and do my audiobook. So I'm really
awesome.
excited about that. Yeah,
Do you have social media by chance?
I do. I'm on IG under my name, Susan_Snow1, and I'm on TikTok for
Sweet, sweet. Well, thank you so much. I'm going to ask you some rapid fire questions if you're okay with that.
sure, absolutely.
What's your go-to comfort food?
Oh my goodness. I would say mac and cheese.
Early bird or night owl?
I'm a night owl.
Sweet. What's your favorite podcast besides this one, of course?
I do listen a lot of Mel Robbins.
Yep.
She's kind of my spirit animal when it comes to speaking.
Nice, nice. What's your next big goal in your career or in life?
Oh my goodness. Well, my biggest goal is to be on a stage in front of 10,000 people. Yeah. I feel like if I can get to one person in that audience, I've done my job. I feel like I know that my message is very important for people to hear. And so I really want to spread this message all over the world.
Who's the last person that you called?
Last person I called. Huh. Who did I call last? Probably my daughter.
Awesome. Yeah,
My
that's a good
my
call.
oldest. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you again, Susan, for being on Mindy on the mic, and we really appreciate you coming on the show.
Well, thank you for having me.